So I'd like to first ask you, how do you define what loneliness is? And in what ways does loneliness fuel autocratic systems? Hey there, I'm Lauren Celenza, a writer, software designer, and interview journalist based in Seattle on unceded Duwamish land. I'm the author of the newsletter Tech Without Losing Your Soul, where I examine tech's influence across geographies, the feelings of burnout and loneliness that many of us feel, the ethical dilemmas facing tech workers today, and the possibilities for balancing our relationship to technology. I'm excited to share with you this fascinating interview that I conducted with Monika Jiang, a German-Chinese writer and facilitator dedicated to building community through the shared experience of loneliness. On her website, she writes, "In a time ruled by swipes, hyper-individualism, and growing distrust towards one another, I explore loneliness as a personal, shared, and societal issue, and its soft power to reconnect with ourselves, each other, and the world." Monika is a regular speaker at international conferences and business festivals, and she recently gave a TEDx talk. She's collaborated with brands like L'Oreal Professional, and during her time at the House of Beautiful Business, she played a key role in building and growing a global community of 50,000 members, working with companies like Google, Salesforce, Porsche, and Volkswagen. Now, Monika continues to work with organizations on impact-driven projects, community engagement, and innovative event design. I first met Monika in Bucharest, Romania this past September at Unfinished Festival, where we sat down together for a conversation about loneliness before a live audience. I wanted to conduct a second interview with Monika, and in this recorded conversation, we explore how we can become more aware of how loneliness fuels fascism, autocratic systems, and the recent US election results. We also examine and reflect on technology and AI's role in trying to solve loneliness, and we imagine and discuss possibilities for how to be more interconnected with one another and how technology could be designed to respect and honor that rather than pulling us away from it. Above all, what struck me most about this conversation with Monika is, how committed she is to bridging divides and stepping into the realities of others to make more feelings known, more faces seen, and more voices heard. And that's exactly why I invited her to join me in this interview. Hi, Monika. Thank you so much for being here today. I am coming to you today in the United States at 7 a.m., 3 days after the presidential election. I don't know if you can hear it in my breath, but I feel scared. I am angry, lonely, but I have focus. So I'd like to first ask you, how do you define what loneliness is? And in what ways does loneliness fuel autocratic systems?
Thank you for being here with me. I really appreciate it. And I partly feel what you feel, or at least I like to think that, because even though I'm not in the US and I'm not American, I think it shook us all to the core. And it also sparked a lot of thoughts, deeper thoughts around loneliness for me. So I'm grateful to have this conversation with you. Loneliness is defined as a perceived lack of having not enough, so quantity, or not close enough, so quality, social relationships. And while I find that that is helpful, that is a good starting point, I think we need to expand that definition. Because I think there's also a part of that that relates to the disconnection to self. So if I feel disconnected from myself, my own values, when I feel a little bit disorientated or just lost, I could have, great friends, partner, or community and still feel lonely. On the other end of the spectrum, maybe there is a loneliness, I think, that goes more towards wanting to feel part of something greater. And before that, before our current, modern times in that sense, it was often church, it was often religion, local community that you were part of. But now with the secularization and bigger cities, and of course capitalism and everything, like so many trends in technology, we're more than ever longing for something to connect with on a greater level. And it can be spiritual, but it doesn't have to be spiritual. It might also be something like nature. But if you don't feel like you're part of that, you can also feel lonely in this way.
I want to sort of ground us in sort of like latest statistics of like the impact of what we're learning as humanity around loneliness. So according to, the World Health Organization, social isolation and loneliness has a serious impact on our physical and mental health, quality of life, and longevity. It's also linked to higher rates of conditions like hypertension. I'm feeling that right now. Heart disease, elevated stress hormone levels, and disrupted sleep patterns. Loneliness also increases dementia risk by 31%. And that ultimately the effects on mortality is comparable to that of smoking, obesity, and physical inactivity. The 2024 study by the American Psychological Association found that teens spending nearly 5 hours daily on social media platforms like YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram report poorer mental health outcomes, including heightened loneliness.
I think what is connected to loneliness as well is often people think, oh, loneliness is only people who are equivalent that with social isolation, right? And social isolation is kind of the objective physical state of I am alone in a room. That is not the same as loneliness, right? Loneliness is it's an experience that is highly subjective. Therefore, it also has this nuance of feeling forgotten, neglected, feeling misunderstood, feeling not represented, and ultimately not seen and heard. They don't get me, right? Or only these and these people get me. And I think that is very relatable to all of us. And at the same time, what we know is that there is certainly a rising group of people who are feeling increasingly neglected and not heard and not seen, and therefore feeling and becoming more susceptible towards far-right populist parties and politics, also towards conspiracy theories, largely these mass movements of false belonging, right? They promise belonging on a very easy narrative. You have a hard life. This is not how you want it to be. You're scared. I'm scared too. But you know what? I know the reason for your misery, which is those people. It's their fault. And therefore, let's rally against those people. So it is very much the weaponization of loneliness in a way, right? Of people longing for ultimately something that is very relatable, very human, very shared. We all want to be seen and heard, but it is a very dangerous and vulnerable place where anti-democratic movements and politics speak to, and they reach to a core and something deeper.
Wow, yeah. Our loneliness is being weaponized. Do you think that if we could bring a greater awareness around that fact, that we could notice when we're becoming susceptible to false belonging spaces? Or do you think that it's so difficult to even get to that place of awareness when we've been feeling so neglected for so long?
Yeah, I think it's quite tricky with loneliness because for us, and that's also what I criticize a little bit with the current measurements that we have on measuring loneliness, is that you need a level of self-awareness to be able to say and admit that you feel lonely and that it is loneliness and not perhaps something else. So because of our cultural stigma and the shame that comes with it, that goes really deep. But perhaps we can still look at the signals that show themselves in a way, right? If somebody increasingly starts to isolate themselves also physically, or starts to become very negative, or like because the effect of loneliness, one of the negative effects is, right, it's a kind of a downward spiral. When people say, oh, when you're lonely, just go out and meet people. Yeah, but if you're really lonely and you feel misunderstood and increasingly neglected, of course you will isolate yourself more,
Right.
and only find, maybe through the internet or whatever, certain ways where you can let out your thoughts, and you feel safe, I guess, ultimately to share those, because yes, these people think exactly like me.
The shame of loneliness brings a lot of pain to the body. And so when we're feeling pain, we feel a desire to eradicate that
Yes.
pain in whatever form we can find, even if it's something that's actually causing more harm, whether to
Yes.
ourselves or to each other. You write a lot about how you believe in harnessing actually the power of loneliness to reconnect with our innate capacities for care and connection. What does it mean to harness the power of loneliness, particularly when there is that strong desire to eradicate the shame and the pain that it
Hmm.
brings?
Yeah, I think it begins by understanding what loneliness is, right? What kind of shape does it take, and how is it not only it's not a personal or just individual issue, but it's something that we share. It's a global public health crisis, and at the same time it is also a very human experience. It can be both, right? It can be an issue, and it can be perhaps wants to tell us something. So let's see this as something that is shared, that we all are intimately familiar with, and maybe together we can be less afraid of it. Maybe we can share this shame in a way, rather than trying to blame ourselves for it and think that, oh, I have to fix it because it's my problem, and now I have to do something against it, and try to eradicate it because everyone else seems to be fine. It's like, no, nobody's fine. Nobody's fine. Like we're all struggling with different things, and it is so important, I think, to come back to a way that we name that as a first step, and then gradually start to normalize it, through which we can find connection and empathy and care and compassion, hopefully.
Well, in the spirit of sharing our loneliness, I just want to go deeper into sort of the kinds of loneliness that I'm feeling and what I'm trying to understand and what it's trying to tell me. I am in a place in my life where living in a very far geographical physical distance from family, not sharing similar political views. Friendships have changed a lot in the last few years, with not just with COVID, but also just the general phase of life that I'm in right now, where so many of our lives are changing, whether it's through birth or death or moving or, just lots of change going on that can cause a shakeup in friendships. It's difficult to make new friends. I'm already kind of a shy person naturally, but also I don't know how to sort of build frequent and establish new relationships. And, I keep trying, but it's one of those things that it's just really difficult. I also live in Seattle, and Seattle is a city where, it's very dark from November to March, right? And so it's very seasonal in the way that community and sort of interpersonal connection works. I also work remotely. I'm mostly interfacing with other human beings through screens. That also has, in the last few years, while I enjoy the flexibility of working remotely, it has brought a realization of wow, I'm really not around other people in the ways that I used to be. What is that trying to tell me? I think I'm still figuring that out. One thing that I feel, going back to having focus in the aftermath of the election, is to not be afraid to go out and put myself out there. And that's why we're having this conversation today, because life is short. While we're here, why not try to make things better? The loneliness that I'm experiencing is really actually asking me to do that in a very loud way. And I appreciate that it's telling me that, even though, yes, there are moments where I feel pain. I'm curious to know what kinds of loneliness you're currently experiencing or processing, and what do you think it's trying to tell you?
I can relate on different levels as you were speaking. In my work, I do feel lonely sometimes, in the work of loneliness. It's not too often, because I try to design the work in and through community. But still, when something like this election happens and wars, something really huge, then I do feel sometimes like, does any of this matter? I
Yeah.
feel so alone on this side of the world in a way. But then most of the times I get reminded through conversations with you, for example, many of us feel like this. So it does give me comfort. I guess I have also a loneliness that's always been with me, which is more on the identity level. Growing up in Germany and living in Berlin, which is an amazing city, and not German at all. And that's what many people say. But still, not feeling fully like, is that the place? Not really. I think I also feel a loneliness that is more, yeah, around my identity and the idea of what is home. How do you detach home from a place and make it? Yeah, and then also with friendships, I have to say, most recently, because I have very long-term friendships, and I mean, I'm very grateful for the relationships in my life, but there are definitely some, as what you described about, life changes and interests and Sometimes I do feel a little bit lonely in the sense of how I see or care about certain things that are perhaps not shared. And especially, I think, with long term relationships, you can maintain a connection because you have shared so much time together, but it can also lack a little bit of that common denominator, might not be yeah, the same anymore. Form different opinions, but then you just go back to the thing that you always talk about and it's kind of nice and you rely on that. I think that can happen. Yeah.
Ah, okay. I'm glad we're having this conversation today.
You're like 7:30 in the morning. Let's go. It's Friday.
Let's go. You mentioned a little bit about home and finding it like a new sense of home, even if it isn't like a physical place. I know that you grew up as a second generation Chinese immigrant in Germany, and you said that in your life, you've always sort of had this balance between feeling estranged and at home. How did you come to understand loneliness as a kid? Or how did it
Hmm.
figure into any conversations you were having with yourself about identity or community?
I love that question. Yes, the identity thing, right? Is like, okay, we look different, we eat different food. Like, that's the experience of a lot of children, like second generation or first generation, probably even more difficult. And wishing you would look differently and you would have different values also, perhaps outside in school at my friend's house, or like outside in the small town that I grew up with. We had a very democratic right, it was very democratic, of course. You can do this and you can do that. And inside of my home, I do feel my parents, who suffered through the Cultural Revolution, they were brought up with very different values also in their homes, created a home for us that was quite authoritarian, I would say, maybe more autocratic, and very much the opposite of a lot of my friends at that time, my friends' houses and their homes. That made me feel very lonely, not only outside but also inside of my family. And so I felt very lonely, and I very kind of captivated in this feeling of not being able to express. We didn't have much conversations about emotions, about our inner lives, really. And I always felt like I'm so overwhelmed with all of my emotions, even as a child and then as a teenager, that I was like, I don't know where to put them. I mean, every teenager feels like this, but if you live in a house where that is also not explicitly shared, for me, if I think about my childhood and loneliness, there's definitely something around feeling very lonely with my inner experience, and the lack of being able to express or to share, and therefore feeling very misunderstood.
What you said about loneliness, that loneliness can be expressed, is
Mm.
like kind of mind boggling to me. Like it feels like for so long when I was growing up, like loneliness was like this amorphous concept. And when you're feeling lonely, just kind of solve it on your own, like don't ask for help, figure it out on your own, be self sufficient. I mean, this is all coming from growing up in the US, especially where
Mm-hmm.
individualism and independence is celebrated above interdependence. What tools do we have, especially when we're children? What tools do we have to sort of understand how to express it if the adults around us don't even really know what loneliness is or how to express it themselves? We're not quite connecting to this point around loneliness as something to express.
Yes, I think that's so true. That's really on point. I mean, I've just started this project now for a year or so, and in the conversations and spaces that I was lucky to be in, I noticed, right, that that is very, very much shared. Like this awareness that is now rising and increasingly happening around, okay, this is not only a thing, but yes, it can be expressed explicitly, and we can accept the range of how it shows up. And there's actually a beauty in that. And it doesn't then translate to, okay, I share how I feel about it or how I'm experiencing it right now or have experienced it, and therefore I look for you to tell me what to do. Right, it doesn't have to go this way. It can simply be, hey, thank you for letting me know, and thank you for sharing that and being open. That's so much already.
I want to shift and talk about loneliness and AI companion tools. Character.ai, Replica, ChatGPT have this like companion like quality. And, artificial intelligence in the form of a companion is not a new concept. I want to give a little bit of like history here to ground us. One of the first AI companion tools emerged in the 1960s. It was called Eliza. Eliza was a chatbot therapist, and it was created by professor and computer scientist, actually from Germany, Joseph Weizenbaum, and his team at MIT. And at the time that it was created, there were reports that even the team who created Eliza, the chatbot therapist, became sort of obsessed with with it. He was quoted to say, it was as if I had disturbed an intimate moment. I found it absurd because she had witnessed the development of this program up close. Hardly anyone, except maybe for myself, knew better than she that it wasn't anything more than a computer program. It was astounding. The effect was absolutely astounding. And this was in the mid 1960s. Today, with all the different AI companion tools that are out there are a decent amount, of app reviews from people describing how much these AI companion tools are helping them through their loneliness or helping them sort of understand themselves. And there are tragedies like the one a few weeks ago of a 14-year-old boy in Florida who became obsessed with a chatbot on character.ai before he decided to end his life. How do you reckon personally with the fact that, these kinds of technological harms or new problems that technology creates continue to be ignored? And do you ever have to guard against feelings of futility, which can also exacerbate loneliness?
These platforms that you just mentioned, similar to big tech platforms and social media, they're led by most giant companies and very much follow an autocratic leadership. It's a business. It is about keeping people on the platform, whether it's dating or AI or Instagram. We are on these platforms, yes, and they might help in some instances for sure to connect us and to share information. But there's also responsibility that needs to come in as a third force between us as users and them as platforms. Because it also doesn't work for me to just say, oh, me, Monika, I now have to, as an individual, not use these platforms and just, exit all of it. And that will not work for that's we're too far in. We're too far in it. So there needs to be a third force in terms of like ethical, moral guardrails that need to be put in place, particularly with AI, but also within the companies, of course. This case with this teenager, it's so tragic. And I mean, I admire the mother who is now understanding that this is an issue that could affect many, many more people and not just young people. And now she's on trial and everything. So to go against, to file this suit against character.ai, which I think is very brave.
In the days following this report of the death of the 14-year-old boy, you wrote on LinkedIn, this reflects the techno-utopian mindset that is pervasive in Silicon Valley, a belief that AI companion tools can satisfy deep emotional needs. Yet, when questioned about risks, companies fall back on a familiar defense. They state that AI isn't real, assuming users understand this distinction. But in a world, and you asked this, in a world where real and artificial are blending more and more with each passing day, where does that line lie? Even though we may intellectually know, even as teenagers, we may intellectually know that the computer we're chatting with is an artificial entity. The feelings that we get from that conversation are very much real. And feelings can drive decisions, and decisions, in the case of this 14-year-old boy, are very much real with real consequences.
I just wonder, right, if something like this is said about, oh yeah, it's not really real and people know, if they truly believe that, or if this is just a PR thing that they say in order to protect themselves.
Right.
I think the AIs, it gets back to the weaponizing loneliness. It's very much manipulating people's need and longing and hunger for being heard, for being understood, of having someone who listens and who is affirmative. I think that's another. It's not just it's there and available. That's one thing, right? 24/7. But then it's also these AIs, they are programmed in a way that they're affirming. Monika, that's such a smart thing to say. Such a brilliant idea. And then, of course, they don't ask anything in return. So it is very enticing. And I 100% understand why someone in their teenage years particularly, but also now, I'm 32. Like, I also understand why I would like to be, in the company of someone who doesn't judge me and who just is affirming, and who is there and who listens and who gets me kind of, and we can escape a little bit. I mean, it's pretty crazy, right? With OpenAI, them as a player, and ChatGPT throwing out this tool to everyone and admitting that also they don't know where exactly this is going, right? To your point about we don't know what AI, generative AI, and what they're all racing towards AGI is capable of and what the effect will be on us as humans. And yet they choose, of course, to pursue it. And we're all part of this crazy experiment in a way that we were as well with social media. But I think there's still quite a gap between social media and content, and okay, there were also some fakes and deep fakes, and something like artificial intelligence that is can come in different characters in different forms and can develop their own thinking, and my AI can just talk to your AI, and where are we then? And like these scenarios are very dystopian, but they're also realistic. And at the same time, I do hope it makes the need for countering with non-digital spaces and different forms of us being in community and exchanging thoughts and supporting each other and listening, even more prevalent.
I want us to imagine for a moment that we live in a world where there are policies and structures in place to compel industries to protect people from these harms. In that scenario, what types of AI tools do you see? How would these tools work differently or respond to humans differently? Are AI companion tools even in the picture at all?
Such a great question. Yeah. It's almost impossible to imagine that they wouldn't exist. That's that's where I am already. Wow. I think one scenario that I could see if AI companions would be in the picture is that I do think, just at the level of where we are in the stigma and the cultural shame around vulnerability, emotions, AI could, in some instances, help to prepare me for real life experiences. Be there to say, like, okay, Monika, so you are, for example, I have to go to this networking event. Let's just take that example because we all hate it. We have to go to this networking event, or it's a work thing, whatever, and I really hate it, and I don't know how to make small talk. I don't like to do that. I don't know what I'm going to say. I'm new in this company or whatever. Can you help me prepare me a little bit for this experience? And then for this AI companion to like role play interactions and give me perhaps a few tips that could help me to be better prepared for an interaction that I'm going to be in and at this networking event or something like that. AI for me could still be helpful in the way that it could prompt and that it could help me open up about some of the more tricky and vulnerable topics that I don't feel like I want to talk to with my parents or friends or family, or I don't have anyone to talk to about. That's also a reality that we have to take into consideration, that a lot of people just don't feel like they have a trusted person, or even if that they don't want to burden that person. So AI could be there to say, like, actually, what if you thought differently, right? What if your friend actually does want to help? Maybe I can encourage you and we can play out that scenario a little bit. So maybe as a mirror in this sense.
I think what I'm hearing through this is like, what if AI could be designed in such a way where instead of it pulling you, the human, into its world, what if there was a world where the AI could understand your world and help you navigate your world? But in order for us to get to that place, there has to be a trust that we have in the AI tools and in sharing even the questions that we're asking about our world and the data that we're giving up.
I love that. I think you put it just perfectly there about not the AI pulling us into their world or creating another escapist scenario
Yes.
or future, but like actually helping us to cope with everything that we have to handle in this real world, because it's a lot, right?
So I want to talk a little bit more about the work that you do through sharing our loneliness. So you've talked a lot about the idea of careerism. I love this word, careerism, which is the false promise or cycle of busyness that, as soon as we think we have found our self-worth and meaning through our work, we have a tendency to spend even more time working to find that feeling again or make that feeling bigger. And then before we know it, decades of our lives have passed and we're still chasing that feeling. I think even in today's world where a lot of us are becoming more and more disillusioned with like all of our purpose must be in our work, I still think we're kind of trying to chase a feeling where maybe our work could, because we're spending so much of our daily lives. In many ways, it is kind of by design, right? We've created an economic system and industries that are designed this way to get people to be really hyper-focused on their work to maximize profits. This hyper-focus, I've noticed sometimes it alienates me from the actual impact of the work on real lives, because I'm so focused on the career or work aspect of it. I'm actually not so much focused on the impact, or I can't see it. In 1844, Karl Marx wrote about, in the economic and philosophic manuscripts of 1844, he called this the alienation of labor, a process by which workers feel disconnected from the products of their own labor. And I don't think this is just in technology. I think it's pervasive across a lot of different industries globally. So through the impact-driven projects that you do with organizations and the community engagement, what have you learned about what it takes to reconnect us to ourselves, to our colleagues, and the real impact of the work that we're doing?
Yeah. This culture of busyness, distraction, it's so pervasive. It does take away from not only the impact of the work, but also the quality of life in some sense. And that's what people tell me over and over again in different ways. Yes, we've become so used, and I've experienced that also. We've become so used to putting our jobs and our work first, especially when we are in an impact-driven space or nonprofit, social impact, or activistic space. Like even there, it becomes even more for other reasons pervasive, because we want to create so much, we want to change the world, and you don't want to seem lazy, right? So there's almost a glorification of that culture, which is to some extent remarkable, because yes, we can achieve a lot as teams and as communities towards something better. At the same time, it's always the question of what is the cost, right? And is it really worth then burning out and looking at these staggering mental health issues that people have and what it feels on the other end? It's gotten just out of balance because ultimately I think it comes from a void that we're trying to fill. Maybe this is not true for everyone. I can speak definitely for myself, and through the community work that I've done, there is something that we're all seeking to fill inside of us. For some, it might be validation, and I want to be the greatest and I want to get on the top. Others, it might be more meaning related, and we're looking towards work as the one single source often. And I think that's the issue, is like if we can diversify it a little bit and try to come from a place of not a void and not a feeling of it's never going to be enough and therefore I have to now hustle for 14 hours a day because everybody's doing it, then I think we would have a very different attitude and approach to our work and our life. Yeah, we wouldn't come from this place of having to fill something, but for recognizing there's already everything in me and I'm doing this work because I enjoy it, because I can help, because I can support, because I'm creating something, but I'm not dependent of it to make me feel valuable or prove that there is a meaning to my existence.
Or I'm aware that this feeling puts the focus back on myself.
Yeah.
And I actually think even in a business context, like an alienation of labor, like when workers don't know the product of what they're creating, it actually suppresses innovation and creativity because you're not understanding like what you're doing at the end of the day.
Yeah. Absolutely. Right. It's just like this, let's just keep going. It's like this rat race.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. Which robs from, especially for creativity. Absolutely. And innovation. Yes.
Are there any particular techniques that you apply when you're doing some of the event design or impact driven projects with organizations to kind of like crack at this a bit?
It depends. I would say generally, so I either do community gatherings where individuals come who have a curiosity for the topic in some sense, or I bring it into an organizational context. If I bring it into an organizational context in a corporate organization or something, a company, then of course I have to create a Trojan horse and then disguise loneliness slightly as a topic in order to bring it forward in a way that can be that feels approachable, that doesn't feel too overwhelming or demanding, right? It's not what I'm not there to convince anyone. I'm just there to share. So that's one distinction. The way that I design these spaces, I think, is always a mix of maybe more intellectual or philosophical thought around, okay, what is loneliness? How do you experience it? How does it relate to us as individuals, but also to our communities, the world? How is it a societal, political thing? Like how does it show up? Because that's just the foundation, I think. Otherwise, we cannot move forward. And then there's also a part around practice. So really creating like a holistic experience for people to flow through. So it's not a traditional workshop where I say, here are the 3 things that you're going to leave with, but I offer different practices, different ways for people to play. There's a moment of reflection, of introspection, then there's a moment of play and movement and embodiment. I think that's so underrated, but the body. We talk about emotions,
Yes.
we talk about connections, relationship. I mean, it's the body. And then sort of a practice around, okay, how do we then practice listening, active listening, and sharing mindfully? How can we learn from each other? How can we open up in a vulnerable way while respecting our boundaries, and then finding moments where the whole group gathers and has an opportunity not only to share but to experience and go through these different moments.
Yeah, I think it's really beautiful, and it's also a very strategic approach. Like
Yeah.
coming in with loneliness. Like, yeah, it is overwhelming. It is attached to a lot of shame and pain. How do we sort of present that in a way that meets people where they are? I want to talk a little bit more on what you touched on as it relates to the hyper focus on ourselves. What I have found to be true about myself is that when I am working or living in these conditions or cycles of careerism or busyness, a sense of mistrust flourishes. I will try to protect myself by expecting the worst. And honestly, this is a useful mechanism, especially when navigating oppressive or manipulative situations. Like, we need to be prepared. Like a second Trump presidency, we need to be prepared. We need to expect for what's coming. We need to be sharp. We need to be focused. But by placing my focus on expecting the worst all of the time or most of the time and mistrusting nearly everything around me, I disassociate because it's too painful to figure out how to actually be productive or sort of like navigate through that. And so I'll throw myself into my work. I'll get it back into the cycle of like careerism. And then I'm disconnecting from my surroundings or my community. And it just creates this unhealthy attachment or focus back on myself. And when that happens, I find myself being more likely to judge myself and others. I resist opportunities to connect with others when invitations are given to me. I don't even really know, like sometimes consciously notice that this is happening in the moment, right? Until much later. And I want to bring in a quote from Hannah Arendt. She was a German-American writer and political theorist. Hannah was born into a Jewish family and grew up in Germany in the early 20th century. And in 1933, when Hitler came into power, Hannah was arrested and imprisoned for practicing illegal research on anti-Semitism. In a 1964 interview that you can find on YouTube, actually, she said that in labor and consumption, man is utterly thrown back on himself. And there you have the connection with loneliness. In the process of labor, a curious loneliness arises, where, in a sense, consumption takes place of all truly relating activities, including public action. When I read that quote, I was like, wow, okay, what can I do on a day-to-day basis now to like make sure that I'm snapping out of this disassociation or like focus back on the self, that I'm unable to really embrace like what's around me. But it's so hard to do that because mistrust feels so heavy on the body. At least for me, it feels so heavy. So I'm curious to know like what helps you trust again, both in yourself and trust others, so that we can take the focus off of ourselves and rise to the occasion of taking public action or supporting causes or people going through struggles that are beyond, ourselves.
Yeah, I love Hannah Arendt. Thank you for reading that quote. It's crazy to think that, yeah, it's all there already. There's brilliant thoughts that have already been thought through so many
Yes,
years
yes, it's
ago,
already
and they
there for
apply so
us.
well to the to the
Yes,
current moment. I'm
yeah.
like, what
Which
has changed?
which actually
No,
gives
but
me a lot of hope, right? That like
yes,
humans
yes,
have lived and survived and gone through this
exactly.
before. What can we learn from
100%.
this?
Same. It gives me a lot of strength, actually. The way that you described what happens with you, again, so relatable, and you, yeah, you have such a visceral way of you put your finger on it. It's not self-sabotaging, but a little bit, right?
Yeah.
Going into this direction of I'm robbing myself from the opportunities, like connections to others, or ways or energy that I could spend elsewhere, because I don't want to be disappointed, because I don't want to be again going through an experience that will be painful and that will reaffirm my mistrust that I already have. I think the first step, and I'm also trying to practice this not every day, but every other moment or so, is to accept that is true and to give yourself care and compassion. And what I mean by that is we cannot beat ourselves up about the way that we respond, because there is always a reason for us to to do so, and that also applies to the things that we've done in the past. Compassion And forgiveness in this sense can be very powerful when we apply them to ourselves too, to say, you know what, I could have responded differently. Yes, I could have gone out to this protest or whatever it is, right? Or I could have talked to this person or went to this event, but at that time, I just decided differently, and that is okay. And to give ourselves grace, I think, is really important, and also for the current moment, right? To be like, yes, I am so overwhelmed or whatever it is. And then in counter to that, what has helped me a lot is to practice gratitude. Gratitude is one of the emotions that helps to fuel our pro-social emotions and capacities. So if we practice gratitude, which is always related to something that we've received, it came from somewhere, and it's usually relational, then we also become aware of a different kind of perspective that is not so focused on everything that is perhaps negative, or we put the, again, blame on ourselves, and it's kind of, it can, right, drive us into this self-victim space where we just feel like, oh yeah, whatever, I cannot do anything anyway, everything is fucked, whatever, I just give up. So to have those moments is okay, but to be constantly in that space is just also not going to help us. Care, compassion, gratitude are big words, but I think we can practice them. To your point about public action, that's probably one of the most effective ways how we can cope with moments of loneliness, is to be of service in some sense, right? To go volunteer. It doesn't have to be, of course, every day or every week. It can be once a month, right? Or doing something that feels good. And what feels good is to give, and just to give to people who look at you and give you a smile, maybe, or not even, just give you a nod, or just take what you gave them. And it still feels great. It feels great because we all want to be needed in some capacity, and we all want to give. That can restore a sense of community that we're increasingly losing because we think that we're alone in the situation we're in, and we're all suffering in isolation, which is making things worse.
What is one small thing that we can give to each other or to ourselves to invite more interdependence into our lives?
I feel that a lot of us feel like we don't have power, and we don't have the agency to shape bigger things, and that life, in our personal lives have just become so overwhelmed, and everybody is busy. And I just want to maybe say that in giving each other the strength and realizing that, yes, we're not alone in that, and that we do have absolutely agency and power to do things, which has nothing to do with claiming or like doing it in a way that we're taking something back, but that it comes from a softer place, that it comes from a more natural place, that it comes from a place of longing, and maybe sitting with these moments like loneliness, and learning how to be with the suffering rather than avoiding it, even though that sounds hard, and it is, but making that a shared pursuit, and opening ourselves more, even to the ones that are close to us, where we assume, oh, we know already everything about each other, and even still there, staying curious and being brave to have these open, vulnerable conversations, I think will give us back some of this, maybe of this soft power, of this soft way of tapping into our agency to shape something together that will ultimately benefit all of us, even though it's going to take time and effort. But I think it's going to be worth it.
It's going to be worth it. Yeah. It's a great reminder, especially right now. I just am so grateful to be in this space with you today to unpack what loneliness is. We can't fully eradicate loneliness, but can we eradicate the shame that's attached to it? And having these conversations in these public spaces, I do think, is a way towards that, and sharing our loneliness and understanding how we navigate through it. So thank you, Monika.
Thank you.